Okay, so today we are looking at learning unit 6, I beg your pardon, 6, value chain analysis, the case of the global food industry. And then we shall be looking at value chain analysis and the global food industry. Um, and then it says, after working through this learning unit and the recommended material, you should be able to outline basic nature and techniques of the value chain analysis, discuss features of the global food industry, and analyze case studies on value chain analysis in the global food industry. Okay, so I'm just going to give like a general what are global value chains, um, um, of which I got like a nice summary just to get us going. So global value chains describe all the stages a product goes through from the idea to the final consumer. When these stages are spread across many countries, a GVC shows how production is now global and not local. They use an example of a smartphone, which may be designed in the United States. The raw materials may come from Congo, may get manufactured in China, and may get assembled in Vietnam, may be marketed worldwide, and of course sold in South Africa. All these steps form a chain, and because it crosses borders, it is a global value chain. A global value chain is the full set of activities required to bring a product from conception to final use. When these activities are distributed across different countries, and then tells us that our study guide notes that GVCs consist of international design, production, and marketing networks. And then it tells us that newcomers must enter these networks to access global markets. Why these global value chains emerged was because of globalization. Some of the reasons here, although please, whenever I give you information, make sure that you also find it, and reference it. This is just stuff. It also tells us it grew because of cheaper transport, improved communication technologies, trade liberalization, and the rise of transnational corporations, which made these conditions easier to split production across countries. And then it tells us that study guide states that GVCs are tied to transnational corporations and modern global capitalism. Okay, now why does global value chains matter? Well, they transformed the world economy they created a cross-border production system. They linked developing countries to global markets. They're shaping employment and industrial development, and they determine who gains and who loses in a global trade. So it tells us that the study guide highlights how GVCs shape development, inequality, and opportunities. Fine, that was now global chains. And then the value chain analysis is a tool used to study how value is added at each stage, who controls the chain, who benefits the most, who is marginalized, where the inequalities occur, and how weak actors like small farmers can be supported. So value chain analysis examines each step in the production, distribution, and sale of a product to understand where the value is created, who controls the process, and how benefits are shared. And then it tells us that our study guide says it tracks input, production, processing, distribution, marketing, consumption, and identifies where value is added, who controls these stages, and how profits are distributed. Now, why is the value chain analysis important? It shows power relations between actors. It shows bottlenecks and inefficiencies. It shows us who captures the most profit. It shows us where development interventions are needed and how to support smallholders, SMEs, and workers. And then it helps develop strategies for poverty reduction, upgrading skills, improving national competitiveness, integrating into global markets. And then within the global food industry, it tells us here that they use the food industry to illustrate GVCs, like food chains. They use coffee, fish, horticulture, and then it shows how value is shared, how farmer Farmers grow crops and they earn the least. Exporters, processors earn more. Multinational brands and supermarkets earn the most. This reflects the concentration of power. TNCs control standards, branding, logistics. Small farmers have the lowest bargaining power. And then it tells us that food global value chains often reinforce inequality and corporate dominance. And then the governance. Now, who controls the chain? So usually there's two types of governance. There's buyer-driven chains. This is led by retailers and brands. It's common in agricultures, textiles, and food. Buyer-driven chains are supermarket control standards, prices, and quality. And then there's producer-driven chains. These are led by manufacturers. They're common in cars and electronics. And then it tells us about Gerefi's framework, which is quoted in our study guide, which explains how governance structures determine access and participation in global value chains. When they mention upgrading, like you're going to be reading some articles where the term upgrading will be mentioned as well as in the study guide. So it means improving your role in the chain to gain more value. So the types of upgrading that you get are the process upgrading, which is better efficiency, products upgrading, which is better quality, functional upgrading, taking on new roles, example, processing, packaging, and then there's chain upgrading, which is moving into new value chains. And then the global value chain analysis identifies where upgrading is possible. And then these are some of the critiques from the study guide, which includes McMichael, who argues that global value chains are parts of global capitalism. They are controlled by finance and transnational corporations. They are harmful to small farmers. They are environmentally damaging and politically undemocratic. McMichael argues value chains are not neutral. They are embedded in corporate power. And then it talks about food sovereignty, of the GB versus the global value chains. So the food sovereignty movement is, they use an example of the Campesina, which resists corporate global value chains by advocating for local control, ecological farming, protection from cheap imports, and community-based food systems. And then the study guide also discusses the anti-capitalist alternative. But simply, this is still just the introduction. So GV's global value chains and global value chains are basically global production networks connecting many countries controlled by powerful actors. Those are GVCs. And then the global value chain analysis studies how value is created, exposes inequality, shows who benefits, guides development policy, helps promote fairer participation in global markets. And it tells us that the study guide repeatedly emphasizes value chains as tools to understand both opportunities and structural inequalities of the global economy. And that was a very nice introduction, to just give us a whole picture about what's going on in this unit. So basically, and moving now to the introduction of 6.1 section 1, it says that the learning unit outlines a particular approach to economic analysis, which aims to inform a development policy and aid local development by tracking at what stages commodities have their main value added and who exactly controls these stages. Then it talks that the commodity chain analysis originated in the late 70s and 80s in the world system theory of Wallerstein, who described how dependency is maintained through the pricing of commodities at different points in the international movement. With the rise of TNCs, a new body of literature termed global commodity chain research examined how these corporations move and price commodities within themselves for their own benefit. More recently, in response to new global conditions, a school of research pursuing global value chain analysis has emerged. So the first assessment was just us watching the video, of which I think I've given enough introduction, more than the video. but do have a look at the video. It's 2 minutes or 3 minutes. So to apply value chain and analysis and for an idea of how much use it is necessary to gain an understanding of the industry in which the value or commodity chain. Okay, so value chain is also called a commodity chain, is located. And this unit would take the case of the food industry, considering both the global context and particularly foods such as coffee and fish. So the value chain analysis is basically a tool used to understand how a product or a service creates value at every stage, from the very beginning, from the raw material stage to the final consumer. Value chain analysis examines each step in the production, distribution, and sale of a product to see where the value is added, who controls the steps, and how they benefit. Okay, fine. So I've already explained the value chain analysis, what it is, and then now this is extra information for yourselves. Key components of a value chain is inputs. Inputs are like your seeds, your raw materials, and your labor. And then production, it's like your farming or your manufacturing. And then your processing, it has to do with your packaging, your sorting, your quality control. Your distribution has to do with transportation and storage. Marketing and retail has to do with shops, supermarkets, export chains, and consumption has to do with the final consumer. Each step adds some value through labor, skills, technology, or branding. Okay. So we already explained what value chains are, but okay. So it tells us that value chains also help us to understand how corporate power structures shape who gains the most from the chain and why it matters for development. And they pointed out the food industry. They talk about farmers growing coffee, collectors buying and grading them, exporters shipping them, roasters processing them, retailers selling them. And then it says value chain analysis, the small farmers earn the least and brand and retailers earn the most because they control marketing and global distribution. Now, the next section of your study guide is part of your task in this learning unit is to weigh up the significance of value chain analysis for development. Value chains are often the product of economic and political struggles, and making the value chains of a variety of commodities serve development may require political intervention and a great deal of effort, not just an economic focus on improving a value chain. It should also become apparent from your reading that in an era when TNCs conduct business in digital form, the tracking of global value chains is sometimes an approximate science. Furthermore, there's a great deal of disagreement about the methods and terminology that should best be utilized in the value chain analysis. Conversely, value chain analysis has the enormous advantage that it can go a long way towards outlining particular institutional structures and processes through which powerful economic players harvest value from a commodity chain, which often starts in the global south. The topic of learning this unit is approached in 3 stages by considering 1, the way in which value chain analysis could promote development, 2, one global industry, namely the food sector, and the third is 2 case studies, one on the value chains in the horticulture export sectors in sub-Saharan Africa, and the other on the relationship between South Africa's 4 largest retailers and SMEs. So don't forget these 2 case studies. The self-assessment activity 6.2, it tells us that we must watch another video. Of which I still feel like we have enough information already about what they would have discussed. So Gerefi, Humphrey, Kaplinski, and Sturgeon describe the significance of value chains in the following manner. The value chain view of global economic integration highlights that for many industries, access to international markets is not achieved merely through designing, making, and marketing new products. Instead, it involves gaining entry into the international design, production, and marketing networks, consisting of many different firms. Understanding how these value chains operate is very important for developing country firms and policymakers because the way chains are structured has implications for newcomers. How can economic actors gain access to the skills, competences, and supporting services required to participate in global value chains? In discussing how corporate interests have established over the global food industry, McMichael argues that value chains are entwined with financialization, which is a process in which financial markets, financial motives, financial institutions, and financial elites gain increasing influence over the economy, politics, and everyday life. World economics is premised on three key dynamics. First, it is the reconstitution of capital through financialization, such that corporate strategies intensify vertical integration from seed to supermarket. Secondly, the privatization of states by the multiple relations of financialization facilitates the reconstitution of capital on a global scale and the transformation of food security into a private relation. Thirdly, the priority given to the reproduction of money increasingly governs institutional politics in global and national arenas at the expense of sustained social policies. So McMichael's accounts states that value chains are neither socially neutral nor necessarily just, but that they are an embedded part of global capitalism. So now you kind of pick up on McMichael's arguments and what he's trying to say. So there's an article about done by McMichael. It talks about, I think, development in the corporate food regime, and it tells us to read the World Agriculture and Empire and Food Sovereignty and the Anti-Capitalist Movement. I write a brief paragraph on value chains as a broader anti-populist strategies around food and agriculture. So basically, I made a summary, a generative summary, which tells us that the section World Agriculture and Empire discusses the historical and ongoing subordination of agriculture to capital. It highlights the role of the WTO as a global executive entity that facilitates this process. It explains how agriculture has been progressively subordinated to capital through mechanisms like a metabolic rift, which refers to the disruption of nutrient cycling between countryside and city. Historically, the subordination occurred within the frameworks of colonial and neo-colonial state systems, but the WTO now continues this process on a global scale. This section emphasizes the crisis of representation and power within the WTO, where southern states are disenfranchised and civil society lacks full representation. It highlights the irony. It highlights the irony of the G20's call for greater market access, which aligns with the corporate agenda of agro-exporting despite its adverse effects on domestic farm sectors in the global south. And so that's just a section on the world agriculture. The text also explores the concept of world agriculture, which is not all about agriculture globally, but rather a transnational space integrated by corporate circuits. This involves the appropriation of farming through practices like bioengineering, factory farming, and the concentration of agribusiness operations. The corporate food regime is described as creating food from nowhere, characterized by the displacement of rural populations, land dispossession, and the conversion of local farming into global supply chains. Then the section concludes by discussing the paradox of corporate empire, which promotes global integration as a condition for food security, while immiserating populations and exporting deprivation. It highlights the socio-ecological crisis caused by corporate agriculture, such as the destruction of small farming, ecological degradation, and the casualization of labor. This text ultimately critiques the corporate food regime as a project of empire that prioritizes capital accumulation over social and ecological sustainability. McMichael in the sections World Agriculture and Empire and Food Sovereignty and the anti-capitalist movements shows us how global value chains operate as part of a broader anti-popular, which is against the interests, needs, or wishes of ordinary people, and anti-peasant strategies, which are strategies that push peasants out or weaken them or make them dependent on powerful actors within the corporate food regime. Like Michael explains that world agriculture is being constructed through the subordination of farmers. Okay, I've already explained that. Okay, let's just read this anyways. McMichael explains that world agriculture is being constructed through the subordination of farming to global corporate circles, where agriculture becomes recognized not around feeding local populations, but around the needs of transnational agribusiness. This shift is driven by global sourcing, dumping, and technological control. Then they talk about the seeds, all of which dissolve local farming systems and replace them with export-orientated commodity chains controlled by TNCs. As a result, farmers across the global south are dispossessed of land, livelihoods, and ecological knowledge, and are instead incorporated as low-wage labor or contract growers in these corporate chains. This represents a form of accumulation by dispossession, deepening social and ecological crises while concentrating power in agri-food corporations. Then the section on food sovereignty and anti-capitalist movements shows how movements like Via Campesina resist these value chain dynamics. They argue that the corporate food regime hides behind trade language, food security through markets, while destroying rural economies and suppressing farmer autonomy. Food sovereignty challenges this by asserting the rights of the people to define their own agricultural systems, protect domestic markets, and prioritize ecologically grounded, people-centered production over export-driven corporate chains. McMichael shows that these movements see value chains as tools of exploitation. They globalize uniform production systems, suppress local diversity, and transfer control of seeds, land, and food systems to corporations. In contrast, food sovereignty movements call for decentralized, democratic food systems rooted in local markets and farmer rights, a direct rejection of the corporate restructuring embedded in global value chains. Okay, so basically all this information is found on pages 9 to 12, the Real World Agriculture. I've just broken it down. So it said, write a brief paragraph in value chains as part of a broader anti-popular strategies around food and agriculture. So this question is asking you to explain. Sorry, can I just see something? Okay. Sorry, that's just summaries. Okay, fine. So the question was, write a brief paragraph on value chains as part of broader anti-popular strategies around food and agriculture. This question is asking us to explain how value chains, especially global value chains, can be used in ways that are anti-popular, meaning harmful to ordinary people, particularly small farmers and workers and consumers. Our study guide says that the global food system has been reshaped by corporate value chains, which operate through financialization, vertical integration, and control from seed to supermarket. These value chains are not neutral. They are part of global capitalism and prioritize corporate profit over social well-being. And that McMichael argues that global value chains helps corporations dominate agriculture, turning food into a private, market-driven relation rather than meeting people's food needs. This is what makes them anti-popular. They do not serve the majority, peasants, workers, consumers, but instead support elite corporate interest. And then, yeah, so that's how we go about answering a question like that. Okay, NADV 2004 examines the relation of value chains and their analysis to poverty, national economies in the global south, and employment. He concludes that participation in global value chains can create employment and comparatively good jobs. So you see, NADV has a total different view to McMichael because he sees it positively with employment and good jobs. At the same time, there are fewer good jobs in the sector, and there are often educational barriers to moving into better jobs. There is also increasing casualization of work in GVCs. And then Gireffi's views, he outlines the growing importance since 1990 of value chains in the strategies of corporations and states, and the move from import substitution industrialization to export-orientated industrialization. And after 2000, and in the post-Washington Consensus era, the role of emerging markets as new sources of demand and production competencies in the global economy. Gireffi portrays an economic environment in which GVCs have become more concentrated and are led by larger firms, but are now more regionally based, with power shifting towards the top manufacturers located in emerging economies such as China, India, Brazil, and Turkey. Gireffi argues that the most dynamic part of the global economy is now not in the trade of physical commodities among nations, but in the trade in the value that is added. It is in the form of production and trade value chains as networks linking large and small suppliers to the global economy. While Gireffi describes a new pattern of production, which is changing the nature of the global economy and has strong participation from the more efficient emergent economies. What does this analysis imply for economies without lead companies and which are currently outside the key networks of production and exchange? So some of these, you just have to read them and just absorb, 6.5, it says, read the article in the e-reserves by Van Broomsen, obtainable at, then it says write a paragraph discussing whether the legal strategies suggested at the end of the article are likely to significantly change the access to supermarket supply of informal and emerging suppliers. So I looked at the title and it says, you can't bite the hand that feeds you. So I got a generative summary about what that should mean. So this means that someone who depends on another for survival or income cannot afford to challenge, criticize, or resist them, even when they are treated unfairly. In the context of Van Broomsen's article, the hand that feeds you is the big South African supermarkets. So this is the other case study now, because it's got Pick n Pay, Woolworths, Shoprite, and Checkers. The people who cannot bite are the SME suppliers who depend on these supermarkets for access to markets and survival of their businesses. Van Broomsen shows that supermarkets have overwhelming power over small suppliers through unilaterally imposed contracts or trading terms, the ability to delist products at any time, rebate commissions, incentive fees, swell allowances, and settlement fees, and threats of blacklisting when suppliers complain, and the high-cost private standards that exclude new or small suppliers. Because their business depends heavily on selling to supermarkets, SME suppliers are afraid to speak out, negotiate, or defend themselves, even when practices are unfair. So the Van Broomsen article explicitly shows this fear that suppliers said that they are blacklisted if you take issues with buyers. Suppliers also said challenging a retailer is self-defeating because it is self-defeating to bite the hand that feeds you. The fear explains why supermarkets can continue unfair practices unchecked. So, like I said, I asked it to summarize about what it means. You can't bite the hand that feeds you. So, the central dynamic in the South African food value chain, as described by Van Broomsen, SME suppliers rely mostly or almost completely on the major supermarkets to access consumers and remain in business. This dependence creates a power imbalance in which suppliers cannot challenge unfair trading terms, high fees, or exploitative practices because doing so risks being delisted, losing their only major source of income. The title therefore reflects how suppliers are trapped. They must accept unequal and often harmful contractual conditions because they cannot afford to bite or oppose the very corporations that allow their businesses to survive. So the summary of this whole article, or the sections we're supposed to read, examines the relationship between South Africa's major food retailers, Woolworths, Pick n Pay, Spar, and Shoprite, and Checkers, and their small, medium enterprise suppliers. So this study focuses on commercial and contractual dynamics that impact SME suppliers, access to domestic food value chains, their sustainability, and their potential for growth and job creation. The key things and findings, okay, the barriers to SME growth and job creation. This paper challenges the assumption that SMEs' access to domestic value chains leads to labor-intensive growth, and it argues that institutional contractual dimensions of supply relationships act as significant barriers to entry, sustainability, and growth for SMEs. Suppliers are often forced into pursuing production upgrading, such as automated production rather than functional upgrading, building worker capacity, which limits job creation potential. And then the social upgrading, which involves passing down increased value to workers, is hindered by the insecurity of contracts and the financial pressures imposed by supermarkets through rebate commissions. And then in terms of the supermarket procurement practices, South African markets dominate the food retail market, with the 4 largest retailers controlling up to 90% of the market. Supermarkets use centralized procurement systems, which impose significant costs and risks on suppliers, including long delivery queues, rebate commission, advertising fees, and other charges. Suppliers are often required to pay incentive fees for their products to be stocked, swell allowances to cover risks, and settlement fees for earlier payment. These fees are non-transparent and vary significantly among suppliers. Pick n Pay's procurement practices are particularly onerous, including unilateral terms of trade that allow the supermarket to delist products without notice, creating insecurity for suppliers. What is the impact of private standards? That section. Supermarkets increasingly require compliance with private production and standards such as HACCP, which are more stringent than public standards. Compliance with these standards is costly and often excludes informal and emerging businesses from entering food value chains. Suppliers argue that public standards are sufficient for consumer protection and advocate for a mandatory grace period for new businesses to achieve compliance with private standards. The power dynamics in the value chains. The study identifies 3 types of value chains based on power relations. Strong independent brands. These are suppliers with strong brands who have relatively equal bargaining power with supermarkets. Then there's the Woolworths private label suppliers. Suppliers for Woolworths private label experience a partnership-like relationship due to Woolworths' investment in their production processes. And then there's suppliers without powerful brands. Most suppliers fall into this category, where supermarkets exercise significantly power dictating terms and transferring risks and costs to the suppliers. Now let's look at the job creation potential. The study found that SME suppliers create more unskilled jobs than skilled ones, with an average of 34 unskilled employees per firm. However, the majority of suppliers prefer automation over hiring more workers due to the risks and costs imposed by supermarkets, undermining the job creation potential of SMEs. Then we look at the policy and legal recommendations within the article. This paper advocates for regulating contracts between supermarkets and small suppliers to address unfair practice, rebate, commissions, advertising fees, and coercion to contribute to new stores. It suggests introducing a duty of good faith in contract law to ensure fairer negotiations and protect suppliers from exploitative practices. The study also recommends regulating private standards to allow gradual compliance for new businesses and eliminate uncompetitive practices. The establishment of an ombud is proposed to resolve disputes between suppliers and retailers, providing a non-adversarial mechanism for addressing grievances. And suppliers should be represented on policy-making bodies to ensure their voices are heard in regulatory processes. This article then concludes that the procurement practices of South Africa's major food retailers have significant implications for the growth and sustainability of SME suppliers and their ability to create jobs. It calls for legal and policy interventions to address the power imbalances between supermarkets and suppliers, regulate private standards, and promote inclusive growth in line with the National Development Plan's objectives. So the question from earlier had to do with just now. Okay, let me just quickly scroll to the question because this is the answer. Sorry. So it said, write a paragraph discussing whether the legal strategies suggested at the end of the article are likely to significantly change the access to supermarket supply of informal and emerging supply. So the next part of the article is found at the end of the article, which is what I summarize now. For you to be able to come up with your answer, you'd have to go to that section. And that section is titled A Duty of Good Faith in Contract Law. You find it right at the end there in the article. So it tells us that a duty of good faith means that parties' freedom of contract is in the case of all contracts, not only supply agreements, is constrained by a duty to act in good faith. A duty of good faith regulates how parties contract, acting as a fairness, procedural restraint, and unchecked power. And then it tells us it has been operationalized in 3 ways: as an interpretive aid, when a contractual clause might be interpreted in 2 or more ways, the judge chooses the one that reflects good faith; as an implicit term in the contract, as a duty to be loyal, to protect, to cooperate, and to inform; and lastly, to prevent abuse of a right by playing a limiting or correcting role. So regulating contracts between retailers and SMEs through legislation, there's the Consumer Protection Act 68 of 2008 and the National Credit Act 34 of 2005 regulates contracts between consumers and retailers. This study has made a case for government to regulate contracts between supermarkets and small suppliers to address practices such as rebate commissions, advertising fees without rights to advertising, coercion to contribute to new stores, unfair strike clauses requiring compliance with private food hygiene standards, and to include rights to information, duties of transparency on the part of the supermarket, and even rights to collective bargaining to associations of small suppliers. And then there's a regulation through new governments. New forms are emerging known as new governance that encourage experimentation, employ stakeholder participation to devise solutions, rely on broad framework agreements such as sector charters, flexible norms, and revisable standards, and use benchmarks, indicators, and peer review to ensure accountability. Then it talks about the UK Competition Commission, which instituted 2 key mechanisms to address supply chain practices that recommended that existing grocery supply code of practice, which is based on supermarkets. Okay, I don't know if we're going to use that. Then there's an Office of Fair Trading, which was enforced through administrative law mechanisms rather than expensive time-consuming adversarial litigation. You have to go through this yourself at the end. The Commission mandated an institutional mechanism, an ombud, to resolve issues between suppliers and retailers with a clear mandate to privilege the complaints and disputes of suppliers without market power over those from concerning suppliers of major branded products that have market powers. These strategies aim to address the imbalance of power between supermarkets and SME suppliers, promote fairer contractual practices, and ensure inclusive growth in the food retail sector. So from all this above information, you should be able to now come up with your own little summary paragraph to answer the question that I'd scrolled to above. And then I think this is almost the last section. Okay. So to synthesize the materials and concerns of this learning unit, the evidence of these case studies should be used to construct a debate involving Garefi's take on GVCs as providing significant opportunities for efficient emerging economies. If you notice, Garefi's article is more like the economy, it's more intense about the economy. So, but I don't know why it's not mentioned in the study guide. I mean, in the articles, nothing tells us to read the article unless it's for an assignment. Okay, sorry, I have to reread. To synthesize the materials and concerns of this learning unit, the evidence of these case studies should be used to construct a debate involving Garefi's take on GVCs as providing significant opportunities for efficient emerging economies, and McMichael's more pessimistic account, which sees these new corporate practices as further reducing the democratic and environmental accountability of business. McMichael is the softer person who really critiques GVC. So if you want to write on this, McMichael is definitely somebody who's going to give you who's going to critique the GVC and how it impacts people, people's social well-beings and SMEs, etc. Through both Van Broomsen and Martens, they advocate strategic government action to cultivate employment in industries involved in GVCs. Will this in fact happen, or will these industries become an elite sector of the economy backed by the government? Okay, so let's go now to the article by Martens or Matens, and it told us to read supply chain structure and governments. And then it told us, yeah. Okay, so, sorry, I just want to scroll. I think this was an activity. So let me just see what the activity was. Okay. Okay, so the activity was basically to put all the information on a table. I think I deleted it. If you look at your last section, you have to create like a table. And now you're going to mention the different countries. Remember in the beginning, it spoke about the other case study. This is the other case study. So we've discussed the Pick and Pay case study and the ShopRite and Checkers and all those other stores. Now we're moving to the next case study, which you will have to find in this previous article. So, so let's start from here. So I've used the exact words, okay, from the article to make it very easier. So the countries that were involved is Madagascar, and the sector is green beans, and the contract or employment structure, okay, the vegetable exports sector in Madagascar is dominated by one domestic exporting company that relies 100% on contracting with smallholders for the procurement of primary produce. The other employment structure is it has led to a vertical coordination scheme, including almost 10,000 smallholders, often very small farms or less than 1 hectare. The company relies on an intensive on-farm monitoring system, including 300 company agents. All of the stuff is directly from the article, exactly as it is. The inputs are supplied on credit by the company at the beginning of the growing season. So Senegal as well, in green beans, it talks about that there are some 25 exporting companies, a mixture of smaller and larger exporters. Their employment structure is it is the largest exporters have changed their sourcing strategies from relying on contract farming with smallholders to own vertically integrated estate production. And then the share of export produce that is sourced from smallholder contract schemes decreased from 95% in 1999 to 52% in 2005. And then the companies that do rely on smallholder contract farming usually provide inputs, credits, and management assistance to their contracted suppliers. Again, so Senegal has does green beans, and then it does tomatoes. The tomato export supply chain is completely vertically integrated. There is no procurement from smallholders, and production, processing, trade, and distribution are completely integrated within the subsidiaries of the multinational companies. And then the export company employed slightly more than 3,000 workers on their fields and in the processing units. So now, to put this into word, this section discusses the difference in the structure and governance of export supply chains in 3 high-value horticulture sectors in sub-Saharan Africa: vegetable exports in Madagascar, green bean exports in Senegal, and tomato exports in Senegal. These differences significantly influence the channels through which welfare effects emerge. So Madagascar vegetable export sector dominated by one domestic exporting company that relies entirely on contracting with smallholders for primary produce procurement, mainly beans and peas. The company has intensified its contract farming schemes with smallholders in response to increasing standards in overseas markets. Then the vertical coordination scheme includes nearly 10,000 smallholders, often operating. It's just written in words now. The company employs 300 agents to provide extension services. Inputs are supplied on credit by the company at the start of growing season. Since 2007, approximately 1,200 contracted smallholders producers have achieved global GAP certification with the support of the export and company and donor programs. Then the green bean exporter sector for Senegal, it features around 25 exporting companies. It tells us that increasing standards have led to large exporters to shift from smallholder contract farming to vertically integrated estate production. The share of export produce sourced from smallholder contract schemes decreased from 95% in 1999 to 52%. Companies relying on smallholder contract farming. And then it tells us that at the time of the survey, 2 large producer exporters were global GAP certified for their own field. And then it talks about the tomato export sector, and all this information you get there. And I remember the task was just to put the information in a table. And then we are concluding this learning unit. It covered content on the value chains analysis. The content emanated from a plethora of literature: McMichael, Nadvi, Gerefi, Maytons, Minton, and Swinnon, Maytons et al., Gerefi, Humphrey, Kaplinski, and Sturgeon. We introduced to the literature. We provided you with key insight on the value chain, especially its significance for the global food industry. Based on this, the learning unit emphasized the value chain analysis and the global food industry, for example. And so this is now the end of this unit. We are now going to look at, is there any assignment? Let me just quickly look at the assignment thing. If we had to get an assignment on this, I just want to, please tell me if you can see what I'm doing on the screen. If you can see what I'm doing, if the screen is changing. Is the screen changing?
Yes.
So you see DVA 481 assessments now?
No, right now it's showing your conclusion to the document that you were using.
Oh, okay. Okay, let me stop sharing. Okay, first let me find if there's any assignment to do with global value chains, how the question would come out. Because I think we've covered quite a bit. We've also gotten into the those e-reserve articles that were mentioned, we did delve into them. So when you guys reread them, or the sections you need to read, it's going to make more sense. I'm just scrolling down to find if we have any assignment. Does anybody have any assignment to do with global value chains? Assessment 2 had to do with global political economy. Assessment 3. Assessment 3 had to do with BRICS. Assessment 4 had to do with economic forums. Assessment 5 had to do with, sorry, I'm just scrolling down. It's quite helpful if you answer an assignment to do with the learning unit. It's very helpful. Does anybody know that assignment? I'm scrolling. I just can't find it before I share the screen. Okay, what's the next assignment? Okay, the
You'll
next
find it
assignment.
under assignment 6.
Yeah, I think it was
There's
first
no
assignment 7, and then when they changed the numbers of the assignment, it became 6. Remember when assignment 1 disappeared from my modules?
Oh,
Yeah,
I
it's
found it
assignment
now.
6 now.
Okay, fine. You know, guys, okay, so basically, I think, yes, I can see the question. Okay, let's quickly get into it now. Okay, so we've already gone through. Okay, let me just try and share the screen. Hang on a second. Let me end this one. Let me stop sharing here. Okay, let's try see if I can share this next screen. You'll just let me know if you can see it. Assessments. Sharing the screen. Please let me know if you see it. And okay. Can you see the screen?
It's now showing.
It's now showing.
Yes.
Okay, so you see assessment 6.
Yes.
Right? Okay, so I'm going to use a lot of intelligence here to show you guys how I use it to basically, because this is a pre-planned assignment, right? We are allowed to use other tools prior, right, to prepare ourselves so that we're able to answer with meat. For example, those who haven't done it, like I didn't do this assignment, okay, which is fine, but okay, how now I'm going to ask it how it's because this is what I'm going to be working on. Once we finished here in the morning, I'm just going to read through the articles that I didn't read. Okay, so give me a second, please. Okay, so it says here what assessment 6 wants us to do, right? It says, okay, discuss the value chain analysis and challenges posed by the global food towards the development of the global south. So this assignment has 2 major parts. The first part of the assignment is we must explain value chain analysis, define what a value chain is, refer to everything such as the steps involved in the product, from farming, processing, packaging, transporting, selling, all the way to the final consumer. Then you need to explain the value chain analysis, which is who controls what at each stage of the chain, how value is added at each stage, who benefits most, and how power is distributed in the chain. And then you would also use ideas now from McMichael, Nadvi, Garefi included, So we didn't discuss the Nadvi, we didn't discuss Garefi. I haven't read those. And then these scholars argue that global value chains are dominated by large supermarkets, multinational companies, and export-oriented standards, which often disadvantage small farmers in the global south. Now, the second part of the assignment would be discussing these challenges posed by the global food industry to the global south. This question then asks you to explain how the modern global food system creates problems for developing countries. So you must outline the power imbalances that we discussed earlier, and demonstrate that through whatever information you have cited or whatever you've understood, such as the pricing, the sourcing, the standards, and the distribution, which leaves farmers in Africa, Asia, and Latin America with very little bargaining power. Then the strict quality and safety standards. Export markets require certifications, packaging requirements, and chemical hygiene and solutions. Guys, remember, please cite all your work. Don't rely on ChatGPT. I'm going to repeat this until people know that during the exam that, you still have to work your butt off for you to have something that's coherent and that is not replicated from ChatGPT. And then, so one of them was strict quality and safety standards. Poor farmers cannot meet these standards, exclusion from high value markets. The other one is unequal distribution of profits. Farmers earn little. Most profits go to global retailers, exporters, food manufacturing, dependency on global markets. Global South farmers become dependent on Western supermarkets, foreign demand, volatile price of global prices. And then there's a shift from food crops to cash crops. I don't know where the information comes from there, but countries may produce flowers, coffee, cocoa. I still have to read those other two articles to be confident of this. And then the labor exploitation, agricultural workers often face low wages. We did hear about this, poor working condition and informal contracts. We did read about this. The environmental pressures, monocropping, pesticide overuse, and land degradation. I think it's going to be one of, especially highlighted in the works of McMichael. So what do you actually need to deliver? So you need to deliver a clear explanation of the value chain analysis and a detailed discussion of how the global food industry harms or limits development in the global south, using key challenges above. And how long should your answer be? Your answer should be 4,000, what is it? 2,000 words, isn't it? 3,000. And that was that, guys, for this article. So now, let me just see if I can't get a quick summary on the, I'm trying to also make studying easier for you guys because we still have 30 minutes. So I'm quickly going to click on the NADVI. Let me quickly go to the NADVI article. Did we discuss NADVI? Didn't, right? Did we discuss NADVI, the article?
No.
Can you hear me? We didn't. Okay, I'm quickly going to the article. Okay, perfect. I'm also going to try and make this thing quicker for you guys. Let's make these 30 minutes count. So let's go to NADVI. I'm just going to, what class is O1? Yeah, I want to go to the NADVI article. Okay. Is everything making sense, guys? Or are you feeling like you're gaining a lot more information from the... Okay, the NADVI. So the NADVI article has to do with just want to, it has to do with globalization and poverty. How can value chain, let me quickly stop this and share, let's share the screen here. Okay. I'm just going to share the screen for the NADVI article. I'm now going to the NAPI article, the screen, and the gray. Is it appearing?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I made it to stop sharing. Sorry. I made it to stop sharing. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry about this. I pressed the wrong button. Okay. Hide, not stop sharing. Let me know if you can see it, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So here, let me quickly, let's see something here. Let's see the summary of this article. Let's just go through this together. Let's just go through this summary together. Globalization and poverty. How can global value chain research inform the policy debate? This is taking, okay, let's see. Okay, so this document discusses the relationship between globalization and poverty reduction. It focuses on the impact of global value chains in sectors like horticultures and textiles on local employment and income in developing countries. Globalization and poverty. The relationship between globalization and poverty reduction is complex, with evidence showing both positive and negative impacts on different countries and sectors. It talks about economic globalization and globalization. Globalization lowers transaction costs for goods, capitals, and information. Trade liberalization is a key aspect, enhancing efficiency and growth. Countries reducing trade barriers often see improved exports and economic growth. Critics argue that globalization leads to unequal gains, particularly for least developed countries. The share of global trade from at least developed countries fell from 0.8% in 1980. Okay, let's see. In terms of the assignment, I just want to quickly. Okay, let's now look for the. Because we're looking for challenges, right? Within the article, outline the challenges posed by the global food industry towards the development. Okay, let's outline. Let's ask it to. Just want to quickly see, sorry, the challenges. Okay. Just want to see how it. I'm hoping I'm asking the right question, yeah. Let me just see this question again. Okay. Okay, so sorry, can I just ask one more question? Just or I always ask all the subsections to be listed so that I can go through them first. List all the subsections of this article, because then I'm able to see which section am I going to jump to. So I said list all the subsections of this article. Let me just first look at the subsections. Then I can able to see. So you see, it tells us here already in the third part of this article, right? It tells us that global value chains in horticulture, garments, and textiles, the key challenges. So already the answer, we should take something out of this article from this section, which is on page, to answer this assignment. It's on page what? It's on page 22. So now you need to read from here. So okay, so section 3 discusses the key challenges faced by the global horticulture, garments, and textile sectors in the context of globalization and their integration into global value chains. The main points are significance for power reduction. These sectors are labor intensive and provide employment opportunities for low-skilled workers, especially women and rural migrants. Export-oriented production in these sectors has the potential to generate substantial poverty, reducing employment and... No, but that's not a challenge. Because now that's not a challenge. These industries are highly integrated into global... Okay, challenges from trade. Opening domestic markets to imports has put pressure on less efficient producers, particularly in the textile sector, which traditionally relied on import substitution strategies. And then regulatory and competitive pressures, changes in global trade regimes, such as the phase out of the multi-fiber arrangement and competition from countries like China, have created a challenging external environment for exporters. Compliance with good standards on health, safety, labor, and environmental practice is increasingly necessary to participate in GVCs. And then there's another challenge, retail and buyer consolidation. Retail concentration, especially in the UK and other developed countries, has led to tighter control of supply chains. Suppliers must meet, remember this must be in the context of the Global South. Suppliers must meet demands for faster delivery, higher quality and lower prices while taking on additional tasks such as packaging and logistics. And then upgrading requirements. Local producers must improve labor productivity, efficiency, and skills to meet demands of global buyers. Upgrading is essential, but has differentiated impacts, creating winners and losers among firm and workers. So far, we've seen 4 challenges just generated. If you go through this article, I'm sure you'll pick up your own. And that was basically what we would have read to answer that question. And so now we move to our next article. Is that okay? Our next article, so Natvi, you go to page 20. Where's this? Sorry, I'm just writing. You go to page 22 for the challenges. I'm just making a note. Then Gerefi, let me stop sharing the screen so I can share Gerefi. Where's Gerefi? Okay. Okay. Now we're going. I'm stopping to share the screen. We're going to Gerefi, the next article. Yeah, I think my computer is freezing because I've opened too much, but okay, let's see.
You have opened Garefi's article, but it's on the first page.
Yeah, it's fine. We're now moving to the next e-reserve because you've seen in NADVI, I've told you guys the answer is on page 22 to add to your assessment 6. That's where the challenges are stipulated. Now let's see other views. You can also read and find other views, you know, but it looks like my, let me just, okay, so now we're going to Garefi. I'm sharing Garefi. Let me know if you see Garefi. You can see it. Can you see it? Has it appeared yet?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so now we've got a total different view. Here, it talks about global value chains in a post-Washington consensus world. So I keep going back to the assignment because for me, it's my compass. By the global development. So I wonder what Garefi is going to say about the development of, okay. Okay, so Garefi talks about, let's just see something here about what this article is actually about. Okay, so it has been marked by significant in the organization and governance of, can I just increase the screen for you guys? There we go. Let me just make it smaller. Yeah. Yeah, there we go, 150. Okay, so the abstract tells us that the ability to more differentiated political governance which focused on new global. Today, the owner of the growth is an internal phase of transformation that are achieving. There. Okay, sorry. Now I'm gonna quickly ask AI to show me all the subsections of this title of this, so that we can see. List all the sections. Okay. Okay, guys, this is going to be a very quick one. List all sections. I'm just going to show you some. Because I find this very helpful to list all the sections of the article, because then I'm able to sift through without having to read everything. Although sometimes it's nice to read because you expand your vocabulary, but at the cost of what, you know? Okay, so here it talks about viewing the global economy through value chains, governance structures, and increasing concentration in global economic upgrading and the new geography of global production and trade, the impact of GVC analysis on the development agendas of international donors. Okay. I just want to see something. Sorry. Sorry, guys. I'm just trying to ask it something posed by the global food industry. Yeah. Going back and forth to the assignment. Okay, so this article discusses global food industry and development within the framework of global value chains. It highlights the following key points. The article examines how globalization has reshaped the organization and governance of industries, including the food sector. It emphasizes the role of global value chains in transforming food trade and distribution, governance and food value chains. The governance structures within GVCs are analyzed, focusing on how lead firms and suppliers exert power. So here, this section, let me see where this section is. This is on page 14. This also opens a door, which is a challenge because it talks about all these lead firms and suppliers exert powers in the food industry, and these cripple the development of the global south. This is where we're using our logic and our critical thinking skills to actually say that this is also one of the challenges for the global south, is because these firms are exerting power, and what are the consequences when they exert powers? You can, list those. The article highlights the role of agri-food standards and certifications in the shaping the ability of local producers to upgrade. So there's another challenge, the certifications, which is on page what? You just have to read through some, okay, it's all here. It's all in page 14. The economic and social upgrading. The article explores how participation in GVCs can lead to economic and social upgrading for developing countries. It emphasizes the importance of linking economic growth in the food industry to improve employment opportunities, labor, and software. Okay, I think it's and then shifting. This article discusses a shift in end markets for food products from developed countries to emerging economies. Okay, what does it say? Okay, it talks about what section is this? Just want to understand where 15. Okay, so you can read from page 13 to 15. That seems like there's a lot of information there. Development agendas. This article highlights how international donor organizations such as the World Bank and WTO and USAID have adopted the GVC framework to address development challenges in the food industry. Okay, that one is not stating the challenges. It's just, yeah, it's telling us something though. Okay, the challenges and opportunities. This article identifies challenges such as income inequality, labor conditions, and the need for economic diversification of the food industry. It also discusses opportunities for developing countries to engage in higher value added activities such as product development and innovation within global food value chains. So here we go. We just need to find out what it's saying about the income inequality and where it is. Okay, so there it is. Let's see, what page are these? It does this sometimes. Let's see. Okay, it's on page 11. Income inequality is on page 11. Social downgrading. Economic upgrading is quite, it does affect us because if they use automation, in developing countries in a way, this is just me thinking from what I've been reading from Learning Unit 6 and what I've learned from all the other people who told us that upgrading had to do with, you either upgrade production or the quality or whatever. And sometimes it does affect your workers, because now you're using automation, which, and then what's it, limited gains for developing countries? That's not a challenge, but okay. It tells us on page 18 that many small and least developing countries in the global economy, the gains associate traditional forms of industrialization in terms of high income jobs. Okay, this article is a bit complex, but there is stuff that can come out. And then I think for now, the shifting the end markets. Yeah, guys, I encourage you to have a read at this article, and take out what you can. even if it's a one sentence. Environmental sustainability, I want to see what that is. Okay. There's barriers to upgrading, yes. So there's a challenge. Barriers to upgrading, it tells us here the challenge of economic upgrading is therefore there on page 18. There's another challenge on page 18. Okay, that's not Global South. Okay. Page 18, there's something there for you. Yeah. Okay, guys. I think we've done what we could. And yeah, you'd have to read the article. And now I'm going to end the recording. And let me just end the recording. That rounds up our lesson. I'm stopping to share. Is there anything? And please, tonight we are